A journey into the unknown. It was a foggy October night when Sarah embarked on what seemed like an ordinary drive through the winding roads of the countryside. She had just finished a late shift at the hospital and was eager to get home. Her route took her along a rarely used back road, one that she only chose because it shaved 20 minutes off her usual journey. She'd never been superstitious, but there was something about the night air that felt different, heavier almost. The road twisted between thick groves of trees that loomed like ancient sentinels, their branches reaching out as though they could pluck her car from the road at any moment. The radio signal had fizzled out miles back, leaving nothing but the hum of the engine and the faint whistle of wind through the slightly cracked window. The night was utterly still, no animals, no stars, just an impenetrable blackness outside the beam of her headlights. Suddenly, Sarah caught a glimpse of someone on the side of the road. A figure stood there, motionless, facing the trees. She slammed the brakes, her heart racing as the car skidded to a halt a few yards ahead. In the rearview mirror, the figure was still there, but now it had turned slightly, as if sensing her presence. Against her better judgment, she reversed slowly, inching the car closer to the figure. It was a man, dressed in an old-fashioned suit, his head bowed. His clothes were out of place, like he'd stepped out of another time. She rolled down the window, calling out, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" No response. The man slowly turned his head to face her, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. His eyes were hollow, dark holes where life once resided, and his face was gaunt, as if drained of all vitality. He raised a pale, skeletal hand and pointed further down the road, then disappeared into the fog. Panic set in. Sarah hit the gas, speeding away from the spot, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. But as she drove, a strange sense of foreboding settled over her. The road ahead began to change subtly at first, but then more dramatically. The trees seemed taller, denser, their branches now almost closing in above her like a canopy. The road, which she knew should have led to the main highway, stretched endlessly ahead, as if looping back on itself. After what felt like hours, Sarah saw something in the distance. A faint glow of light. Relief flooded her as she thought it might be a gas station or someone's home. But as she approached, the light revealed itself to be a small wooden house, its windows aglow with flickering candles. It was the only building she had seen for miles. She pulled up, hesitating before stepping out. Her phone had no signal, and there was no sign of other cars or people around. Against her instincts, she knocked on the door. No one answered. She knocked again, this time harder, but still, nothing. As Sarah turned to leave, the door creaked open on its own. The air inside was cold, unnaturally so, and smelled faintly of damp earth. "Hello," she called into the darkness. The only response was the echo of her own voice. She stepped inside, driven by a need to understand what was happening. The room was sparsely furnished, with just a few pieces of antique furniture and a large faded portrait hanging on the wall. The portrait depicted the same man she had seen by the side of the road, his hollow eyes now staring directly at her. Fear surged through her as the door slammed shut behind her. The room grew colder still, and the candles flickered wildly before being snuffed out all at once, plunging her into darkness. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps as she fumbled for her phone's flashlight. When the light finally flickered on, she screamed. The man from the portrait stood inches away from her, his skeletal hand outstretched, pointing once again. With no other choice, Sarah followed the direction of his finger, stumbling through the house's narrow hallways until she reached a back door. She burst through it, only to find herself standing on the same road where she had stopped earlier. Her car was right where she had left it. Shaking, Sarah got into her car and sped off, not daring to look back. The road ahead now seemed normal, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. She finally reached the main highway, her heart still racing, her mind unable to process what had just happened. When she got home, Sarah collapsed into bed, trying to convince herself it had all been a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But when she woke the next morning, something was different. On her dresser, placed neatly where her keys should have been, was a small, old-fashioned coin, one she had never seen before. Next to it, a slip of paper with a single word scrawled in faded ink.